Hello to everyone attending this presentation. My name is Michael Willis and I'm your presenter for this workshop entitled Shed Light on Those Magnolias, Case Studies in Louisiana Research. For those that may not know, the state flower of Louisiana is the magnolia. And metaphorically speaking, when I refer to magnolias, I'm talking about our Louisiana ancestors. See, light is synonymous with knowledge and understanding. So my goal is to empower you with the knowledge of how to find and learn more about your magnolia ancestors, discover new information you may not have previously known about them, and to better understand your family history. I have been researching in the state of Louisiana for the past 23 years, and quite honestly, I have to say I'm very grateful to have ancestors from a state that has some of the most comprehensive records that you will find. And today, I hope to point you in the appropriate direction where many of these records are kept. Just so you have an idea of what we'll be covering today, first I will give a little historical context to the content that we'll be covering because Louisiana research is unique compared to other states, and I believe addressing the state's historical background helps to keep your research methodologies in perspective. Beyond that, much of our time will be focused on the different types of online and offline, or rather on-site resources available to successfully research in Louisiana. I will cover case studies that show how I've applied these resources to my methodologies. For full disclosure, prior to the explosion of genealogical record collections online, it was challenging to research when you did not have the time, money, or the resources to travel to distant locations to search for records. When I got desperate enough, I hired a researcher to go the extra mile that I could not, and it was well worth it. But because I wanted to be a genealogist myself, I analyzed and studied how the researchers did it and why. And once I understood the methodology, things made more sense. Once internet access to historical documents improved, some of those methodologies changed, and I realized that now there are multiple ways to shed light on those magnolias. Just make sure you solidly validate your findings and that the evidence supports your narratives. And that's something you may have to reevaluate over and over again to meet the genealogical burden of proof, because African American genealogy is not for the faint of heart, but it is emotionally and spiritually fulfilling. I will be showing resources that were either unavailable or not known to me 10 to 15 years ago, but they are now the foundation of how I operate. And fortunately for you, they are now at your disposal. So let's get started. After the territory of New Orleans was founded by the French in 1718, Louisiana had become a colony of the French crown by 1731. Over the next 30 years, the population of the territory dramatically increased, with the French-speaking Acadians, also known as Cajuns. But in 1762, the French ceded the Louisiana territory to Spain, who controlled it until the beginning of the 19th century. The French regained control of Louisiana shortly thereafter, and they sold it to the United States in 1803 in what would famously become known as the Louisiana Purchase, making Louisiana the 18th state of the Union by 1812. Nearly 50 years later, on the dawn of the Civil War, Louisiana seceded from the Union to join the Confederate States of America. After the Confederacy lost the war in 1865, Louisiana was readmitted to the Union 3 years later in 1868. Earlier, I briefly alluded to the fact that researching Louisiana is unique compared to other states. One of the major reasons is that Louisiana is the only state that uses French civil law, unlike the other 49 states who use English common law. Based on the brief history I just covered, you can understand why, because again, historical context is important. As a result, Louisiana's use of French civil law, which is derived from the Napoleonic Code, influenced them to refer to their territories as parishes instead of counties. They also have slightly varied legal terms, such as successions, instead of what's commonly known as probates, which I will cover in greater detail in part 2 of this presentation. But probate refers to inheritance, beneficiaries, and estate law. Real property is referred to as immovables, whereas personal property is referred to as movables, and collateral is referred to as a pledge. The uniqueness of Louisiana's civil law applications also permitted women to benefit from property law more than any other state in the Union. In part 2 of this presentation, I will show you examples of how this advantage for daughters of Louisiana slave owners allowed me to find records on my ancestors. This excerpt comes from a dissertation written by Sarah Jane Brooks Sundberg entitled Louisiana and the Law of Property under Louisiana Civil Law from 1782 to 1835, in which she wrote, Louisiana civil law offered women significant advantages over the predominant common law tradition found in most early American states. Louisiana civil law, unlike common law, allowed a married woman to retain her legal identity, her personal property, and her right to monetary rewards from her labors within the family. The next two slides show several resources that will aid you in your research efforts. This first slide shows you resources that are commonly online, such as FamilySearch.org, Ancestry.com, historical newspapers online, Freedmen's Bureau records, which is really another workshop within itself, where you will have to learn more about the descriptive pamphlet for the state of Louisiana known as M1905, Le Comité des Archives de la Louisiane, Inc., a Louisiana historical society with great resources for every parish. And for the record, that's the last time I'm going to attempt to say the society's name for you. From this point forward, I'm just going to say Le Comité for short, because I'm not going to be able to say that again. But there are historical and archival repositories that not only have online resources, they are also physical locations, meaning that these entities have facilities you can visit while also providing online research guides, finding aids, and descriptive pamphlets that guide you to the records that you're searching for at their facility. This will save you time and money, but in most cases, it helps you prep for research trips you may have to take at a later date. Now, there won't be enough time to cover all of them, but I will show a few examples where I utilized these facilities. I want to start with the Louisiana State Archives, not only because it's a good example of what I'm talking about, but also because it gives a good summary of how its vital records are organized, what's currently available, and why. The archives holds a wealth of information such as government records, books on general histories, church records, family histories, probate records on microfilm, and fantastic parish and state maps. But what I have primarily used them for is birth, death, and marriage records. 15 years ago, I would search their online index or ancestries and print out their order form, send it with a $5 check per request, and they would mail me the records within 5 to 7 business days. And I can still do that, and I will show you how in my first case study, but thanks to technological advances, I can get them faster now without paying a dime, and I'll demonstrate that in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about how their vital records are organized. First, understand that for any death record you request, the state of Louisiana requires that the death of date be at least 51 years old. Today's date is March 9th, 2024. So any death occurring after March 9th, 1973 will not be released to the public under any circumstances until its 51st anniversary occurs. The second goes for birth records that are at least 100 years old, but you must keep in mind that only Orleans Parish births were recorded prior to 1911. Orleans Parish kept great records, but the state did not mandate statewide reporting from the other parishes until 1918. If records do exist for other parishes prior to that year, you will have to explore local records in your parish of interest to see what they have. I was fortunate that I had ancestors from another heavily populated area, East Baton Rouge Parish, and they did record births and deaths prior to 1918 in their local repositories, which I will show you later on in this presentation. And lastly, you can also acquire Orleans Parish marriage records that are over 50 years old. Their online database has marriages dating back to 1844. I found that there are about 119 marriage indexes online between 1844 and 1869. So from 1870 on, each year has thousands of records. So it dramatically increases. For marriages outside of this parish, again, you will have to find local records in the parish, and I will show examples of how to do that as well. So the first case study that I want to talk to you about deals with the Louisiana State Archives and their online index, Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.org. The reason why I'm starting with this case study is because 97.99% of the genealogy cases I take on, those three websites are where I start. In beginning level genealogy, we teach everyone to start with what you know and work your way backwards. Interview your oldest living relatives and gather as much information from them as possible about who their parents were, grandparents were, and so forth. The methodology that has always worked for me is to get as much vital information as I can from births, deaths, and marriages, even if it's approximated, and utilize these three websites to begin my search. In 2010, I interviewed my wife's grandmother, affectionately known to the family as Grandma Stell, and she told me her mother's maiden name was Charlotte Henderson, who you see here in yellow, and that her family lived in both Minden and Heflin, Louisiana, which a quick Google search showed both towns were in Webster Parish. I found this 1900 census, which showed Charlotte's parents, Willis and Tennessee Henderson, born in 1856 and 1857, respectively. Grandma Stell confirmed this information. With that information, I searched the Louisiana State Death Index from 1900 to 1949, which is an online collection on Ancestry.com, and I found a person named Willie Henderson, born about 1852, who died June 19, 1917 in Webster, Louisiana. Now you may be wondering, well, if his name was Willis, why do you pay attention to Willie? Well, the reason why is because my experiences taught me that index records, whether created by Ancestry, FamilySearch, Louisiana State Archives, or any other repository, are sometimes transcribed incorrectly due to poor handwriting or damage to old documents, therefore making them illegible on scanned images. Other possible complications that can transpire are that the recorder of the deaths just simply wrote the wrong information, or the informant provided the wrong information. These are the things that you must consider anytime you look at a document or an online index record, because you never know what the truth is, but you must do your due diligence and explore it. So as you can see on this record, it says the death certificate can be found in volume 13. This will become handy when you cross-reference with the next website, Louisiana State Archives Online Death Index, and FamilySearch's website after that. This slide shows you the front page of the Secretary of State's website, which will take you to the Louisiana State Archives Vital Records by clicking on Historical Resources from the menu, and then click Research Historical Records from the drop-down menu. You will get to this page that leads you to the Louisiana Vital Records Index for the Louisiana State Archives. Here, the index is broken down into three categories: Louisiana Death Records, Louisiana Birth Records, and Orleans Parish Marriage Records, with great descriptions of each record set, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. When you click on Louisiana Death Records, you have the option of doing a basic search or an advanced search. I always do an advanced search, and under that option, all you have to do is partially type a name and the results will auto-populate any records matching that string of text. So in this particular case, you can see that just by typing HENDR as a partial last name and the initial W for the first name and choosing the presumed parish of Willis Henderson's death, I get 5 possible results. You'll also notice that the second result matches Ancestry.com's Louisiana Death Index record because the date of death is the same, June 19th, 1917. And the volume is also 13, and the name listed is Willie Henderson. You will also notice a hyperlinked string of text that says print form under the death year. Clicking that hyperlink takes you to this printable form to order the certificate. Here, you can enter your name, address, phone number, whether you want a certified copy or a non-certified copy, also known as an informational copy. A certified copy is $10. A non-certified copy is only $5. I can tell you that I've never ordered a certified copy because I've never had a legal-based reason to do so. I've only wanted them for genealogical purposes. So after you fill out these fields, click Create Printable Form. The application for copy of public vital records form appears, and it auto-populates all the information from the index record and the contact information that you provided. As you can see here, the form provides the volume number and page number located on the certificate, making it easy for the staff member to find it in the bound books. The archives will only accept checks, and here they state who to make the checks out to and where to mail it. I've redacted my contact information for privacy reasons, but you can see how the information populates on the form and indicates the total fees due. It's a fairly streamlined process. However, there is a much simpler process that is easier, cheaper, and documents are instantaneously accessible. That process involves the third website that I mentioned earlier, FamilySearch.org, in which you can search by clicking on the text records from this drop-down menu under the search category. It will bring you to this dialog box where you can enter the first and last name of the individual as well as the location and year of the event that you are tracking. In this case, I typed Willis Henderson, the Parish Webster, and the year of death, 1917. When I clicked the yellow search button here, the results show the same information listed on the State Archives site as well as Ancestry.com. But notice the first name is not Willie, it's Willis. This tells me Ancestry.com and the State Archives more than likely transcribed this death certificate incorrectly. Maybe one of them extracted the information from the other, I'm not sure. But when you click on this little document icon here, it takes you to this screen that gives you a summary of the information that's in the death certificate. Fantastic thing about FamilySearch is that they will provide you the names of the parents if they were provided on the death certificate. Over the years, I've ordered death certificates for the sole purpose of getting the parents' information, but now FamilySearch has made it easier for us to get that information without having to spend $5 to get it. Doesn't mean that I still don't want to see the actual document because, again, transcriptions may contain errors, but you always want to see the primary source information, which is the document itself. Which brings me to another great benefit FamilySearch provides, digital images of the actual documents, but that's under certain restrictions and conditions. The Louisiana State Archives does not permit FamilySearch to provide unlimited access to digital images of scanned documents. They only allow FamilySearch to provide access to the images from their local family search centers, as illustrated here when you click on the thumbnail image to the left. I live in Placer County, which is right next to Sacramento County. I could not view this image from home, so I had to drive to the Sacramento Family History Center and view it from their computers. If you have a thumb or USB drive, you can download the image to the drive. You can read FamilySearch's FAQs or frequently asked questions for more information about that process. This is Willis Henderson's death certificate. So what additional info does this document provide compared to the indexes? Well, we see at the top of this document that this event occurred in the village of Heflin, as Grandma Stell indicated. We also see his name listed as Willis Henderson, but it is understandable as to how it could be transcribed as Willie because this document is in pretty bad shape. On the left side of this document, he's listed as a black male, 65 years old, and born around 1853. And I can also make out that he was self-employed, born in Mendon, and that his parents were Bob Henderson and Marietta Simmons. And the informant who provided the information was Sam Henderson, their firstborn child. On the right side of the document, I can see that he died at home and that the stated cause of death was locomotor ataxia, which is a progressive and degenerative disease of the central nervous system. This next case study is about my great-great-grandfather, George Arthur Fleming, who we call Papa. In this case study, I found out some astonishing things about Papa, who died in his 90s when I was only 2 years old. One of the common themes that I heard from many relatives about Papa was that he never really talked about his family or his childhood. His side of the family was a complete mystery. So again, I started with what I knew and I worked my way backwards. I found Social Security death index information on Ancestry.com that stated that he was born August 16, 1886 in New Orleans, and that he died in the city in March 31st, 1974. At the time I started searching, his birth would have been well over 100 years ago, so I decided to search the birth index records on the Louisiana State Archives website. Now, there is something interesting that I have to tell you before I get into the details, but my great-grandmother's brother, the late Earl Fleming Sr., Papa's youngest child, told me that Papa did have a brother named Nathaniel, but Nathaniel did not go by the last name Fleming. He changed the F to a P and went by the name Fleming, Pleming. Uncle Earl was puzzled by this and never understood why his uncle did that. As a young boy, he would ask his father about it, but his father would not engage in conversation about it. Because of the information Uncle Earl shared with me, I searched for the birth records under the name Fleming, starting with a PL, since I couldn't find Fleming with an FL. I didn't even choose a parish, and look what we have here. 4 children under the name Fleming with a Pleming. George Jr., Georgiana, Lillian, and Nathaniel. All children born to George Fleming Sr., but only my papa, George Jr., has a different mother named Melinda Carr. Now, you know it's about to get juicy. I mean, it's about to go down. So when I first found this information, I immediately called Uncle Earl and I asked him if he remembered his grandmother's name being Melinda. And he yelled out, "Grandma Melinda, yeah, that's what we used to call her." And when I asked if he knew anything about his father having a different mother than his other siblings, his memory was vague on the subject because, again, his father didn't like to talk about his family, so it appeared things were hush-hush. The only thing he could tell me was that Papa was a very dark-skinned man and that all of his brothers and sisters looked like they could pass for white. He did remember Georgiana. He said that they called her Aunt Daisy, but he didn't know the rest of them. So it was very clear that there was more to the story than we all knew. I ordered Papa's birth certificate, and it states he was born August 16, 1884, which is fairly consistent with his Social Security death index record, and that he was the illegitimate issue of deponent. The deponent in this case is his father, George Fleming, who is declaring before the court Papa is his son, but that he is not lawfully married to Melinda. The other siblings on their birth certificates are all declared as legitimate children of George and Lucy Kellogg, who was their mother. The reasons for Papa's silence about his family started to become clear. I searched everywhere on FamilySearch and Ancestry.com for any records of Melinda Carr. I couldn't find one shred of evidence of her existence. I checked under the name Melinda Fleming to no avail, which led me to hypothesize that they may have never been married. But one day it hit me. Was it possible that Melinda had other children, and if so, would her maiden name be listed on the birth certificates as it was for Papa? If I could answer that research question, I might be able to find more information about who she was. Referring back to this advanced search tool for Louisiana birth records, I searched for any children who were born to Melinda Carr by typing the mother's name. And look what I found. I discovered that Melinda had 2 other children, Ella and Monroe Jones, within 3 years, a 3-year span before Papa's birth, but with a different father's name, Gabe Jones. Was she married to Gabe at the time of George's birth? More research questions were mounting as I dug in further. Several years later, I became familiar with the FamilySearch catalog on the FamilySearch website. This is one of the most invaluable tools, regardless of what state you research in, that you will ever have at your disposal. Please understand that what FamilySearch is providing you is a result of decades of missionary work done by members of the Church of Latter-day Saints to, in some cases, microfilm old records from courthouses, libraries, historical societies, and universities around the world, and then in later years digitize them and make them available for viewing from their web portal. This is nearly the equivalent of bringing the courthouse to your home computer and calling it a research trip. Now, I'm not going to tell you that all courthouse records are on this site or anywhere else online, because they're not. There will always be some traveling involved. But that is where you will have to take the time to do what I'm about to show you and take inventory of what FamilySearch has. This particular resource has made it easier for us to research. I want to share with you how I used it to solve my mystery about my Papa George Fleming Jr. First, I clicked on Catalog in the navigational bar at the top to bring you to this screen. Make sure you search by place, as is already selected here, and type the parish of interest. In my case, it's New Orleans. And then click the blue search button at the bottom of the screen. On the next screen, you will see tons of record types that you can search, whether you want to look at cemetery records, church records, divorce records, court records, maps, newspapers, all for Orleans Parish. There's tons more you can't even see on this screenshot, like land records, successions, probates, wills, deeds, voter registration materials, birth and death records, and so on. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm spoiled, being that a major branch of my tree came out of New Orleans. So there is a wealth of information available to anyone searching this parish. Two other major branches of my tree also came from East Baton Rouge Parish and West Feliciana Parish, where there are also tons of records. And yes, I bathe in my fortune and privilege. I will not deny that. For smaller parishes such as Bienville, Webster, Evangeline, or St. Mary's Parish, the collections may not be as extensive, but that does not mean that they are not worth looking at. I have searched for several clients. I've researched for them from these parishes, and even though some of the records may be a little bit more challenging to get, I still find gems all the time. In Orleans Parish, I spent a lot of time browsing the records just to see what they had and to study how the books were organized. In this collection, called Case Papers from 1880 to 1929, it gives a brief detail about the collection. It tells you there are 1,310 microfilm reels containing courthouse records. That's a lot of information. In the notes, it tells you that the original records are microfilmed at the New Orleans Public Library, which I know to be true because I was there in 2006 and I saw the microfilms. There's another note here that describes some of the content in the case papers as interdictions, divorces, successions, emancipations, separations of property, tutorship, etc. When I scrolled further down, I found the indexes to the case papers. Now that's huge. Whenever you look at collections like this, my recommendation is that you first find the indexes, because if you are familiar with individuals who lived in these parishes during these time frames, it would be wise to search the indexes for names of the people that you're familiar with and see what kind of records you can find on them. And since I had plenty of time on my hands, I just decided to go down the line, collection after collection, and look at all the indexes for all these years and see if I might find any of the names of my relatives who I knew lived in the parish during that time. I started in the first reel, which is the index to case papers 1 through 14,934 for the years ranging from 1880 to 1885. And on the right side of the screen, you will notice the associated film number 7670060. Now you see this little black camera right here? The camera lets you know that there are published images here that you can view without restriction. If you see this same image with a black key on top of it, that means you can view the images, but access is restricted. In other words, you would not be able to view the microfilmed images from home. You would have to go to the nearest FamilySearch center in your area and you would be able to view them from their computers. If instead of a camera, you see a black film reel, that means that the images are not available online, but the microfilm is available at the FamilySearch library in Salt Lake City. So anyway, when you click on this camera, you will see hundreds, if not thousands, of images in here. I read through them in alphabetical order, and when I got to image number 529 of 822, I found this entry here. Case number 9809 between Melinda Kerr and her husband, Gabriel Jones. It does say Kerr instead of Carr, but given the location, the time frame, and 3 of the 4 first and last names being accurate, I was convinced that these were my subjects. Once I identified a case number, I searched for the associated collection. The case number 9809 must be right here in the volume containing 9806 to 9851 in the year of 1883, and the associated film number is 7690441. There are thousands of court papers that appear in here. All I had to do was scroll to case number 9809 and look at the contents they microfilmed for our viewing pleasure. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire file, just key documents that show beyond a shadow of a doubt this involves my third great-grandmother, Melinda Carr. Here you see the case file number 9809, and it appears to be some kind of divorce proceeding between Gabriel W. Jones and Melinda Carr. The information in the case file explains a lot. This document, which is a petition from Gabriel's lawyer, talks about how they were married in 1878 in New Orleans, but he claims his wife has acted in a most outrageous manner and has so conducted herself as to violate every duty of a wife, which he says was forcing him to leave his wife in January of 1881, and claims that during that time since, she has committed adultery for the past 3 years. He goes on to say that in May of 1883, his wife was committing adultery with one George Plummer, Arthur Rose, and others for over 3 months, and that she was, quote, a kept woman, unquote, to Plummer and the other men. He also claims that in November of 1882, she had delivered a child by another man. So reading these case files, it's clear that Gabriel sued her for divorce, not only because of the infidelity, but also because he probably didn't want to be on the hook to support a child that was not his. Now, we must keep in mind that these are all his accusations. Some of it may be true, some of it may be exaggerations, but we have to keep in perspective that he's trying to win a court case, because we really don't know whether or not he was unfaithful, or if he was abusive or abandoned her previously, which led her into this accused lifestyle. And I only say that because I've seen other cases in my family tree where I knew based on credible oral family history that the husband was the philanderer and abandoned his wife and children. But then you'd find a newspaper court bulletin that he filed for divorce on the grounds of quote unquote abandonment, all because the wife got tired of his mess and left him and moved out of state. Well, needless to say, the image appears to be part of the court report that describes testimony taken from 3 people: Arthur Rose, one of the accused adulterers, Richard Smith, and Mrs. Delia Caillou. Now, for the sake of time, I did not add the rest of the document in this presentation, but just to sum it up, these 3 people testified to what they knew about the relationship between the husband and wife, as well as Melinda's activities during this time. Arthur Rose flat out denied any improper relationship with her. However, he and Mrs. Caillou in particular gave detailed testimony about witnessing the times they saw George Plummer come to Melinda's residence at various hours of the night and leave in the morning. Lastly, one thing I want to point out about this whole story is that I shared this with my late mother before she passed, and when I mentioned the fact that Papa's father was referred to as George Plummer, she immediately got excited and said, "You know, that's what my grandmother used to call her father," referring to Papa. She said plumber. She used to call him plumber, Plumma. And she said, I always wondered why she called him that. I also found an 1870 census showing Papa's father and sister as children, and their last name was spelled Plaman, like plumbing. So it's clear that the pronunciation of the last name was different than what we knew it to be, far different from Fleming. As messy as this whole story is, I can confirm that Papa's father was George Fleming, Fleming, or whatever his name was, because some of the descendants of Papa's half-sister, Aunt Daisy, Georgiana Fleming, they all took multiple DNA tests, and they all are listed as my relatives. So in this case study, I'm going to focus on Papa's wife's side of the family. Her name was Cora Page, and her mother was Fanny Shields. In this example, I'm going to show how the FamilySearch catalog, specialized collections, and local records can answer research questions that spawn from census data. This image is a screenshot of the 1880 census showing Cora's parents, Jack and Fanny Page, and their firstborn child, Laura, at approximately 18 months old. They are shown here to be living in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana, which is at the southernmost tip of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico. Having had multiple conversations with my grandmother about our family history on this side, I knew this family originally came from a town called Houma, and that they moved to Orleans Parish sometime later. The obvious research question for me was, when? This next screenshot is of the 1900 census in Orleans Parish in the 11th Ward 20 years later. By this time, my great-great-grandmother, Cora Page, who's highlighted in yellow, is born, and she is living with her older sister above her, Laura, her father, Jackson Page, and her mother, Fanny. Additionally, there are younger siblings, Lily, also known as Lillian, Nellie, William, Mary, and Jack III. All are highlighted in green. You'll notice they made a mistake on Laura's birth year. She was not born in 1871, she was born in 1879, as the 1880 census already proved. I'm sure it was a mistake by the numerator because she was not 29, she was closer to 21. One of the ways that I tried to determine the year of their migration was by first seeing if I could find all the birth certificates of the children born in Orleans Parish. Laura more than likely was not born there, but the rest of the children I really was unsure about. I did find birth certificates for these 4 children though. Here's an example of one of them for Nellie Page and her brother Willie Page, born to Jack Page and Fanny Shields in 1889 and 1893 respectively. But the 3 older children, Laura, Cora, and Lily, I could not find any evidence of their births in the parish. Shields. To answer that question, I want to introduce you to another record set for marriages outside of Orleans Parish. As I stated earlier, because the state archives has limited information on marriages outside of Orleans Parish, you will have to seek alternative record collections for marriages that occurred in your parish of interest. This is a screenshot from the Terrebonne Parish Library's website that details a special collection that is commonly used for that type of use case. It's 30 volumes known as South Louisiana Records Books, conceived and compiled by a Catholic priest and genealogy enthusiast named Father Donald J. Hebert. Here is a cool graphic that shows you all the parishes his books cover. He compiled indexes to births, baptisms, marriages, deaths, and even succession records, in some cases from both civil and court documents, which are public records, and church registers, which are private records. When I visited the Louisiana State Archives in 2006, I found these index records to Terrebonne Parish marriage certificates on my 3rd great grandmother, Fanny Shields, and her 2 sisters that my grandmother told me about, Nancy and Martha. I've located copies of this book series in several different places. Besides the Terrebonne Parish Library, the Louisiana State Archives has a copy of the volumes, as well as the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. If any of you have ever heard of the website worldcat.org, which is a great resource for finding library resources around the world, you can search there for Father Hebert's books as well, and you will find copies in various universities across the country. The indexes that I found led me to write the Terrebonne Parish Courthouse and request the marriage certificates. This one is my third great grandparents, Jackson Page, also known as John, and his wife Fanny Shields, married in August of 1877. So that verifies the 23 years that they said they were married in 1900, and it was recorded in Terrebonne Parish. Now, if we go back to the FamilySearch catalog here, we find this record collection, voter registration records from 1891 to 1952. In there, I started digging around and found these incredible lists of males who registered to vote in 1896 in Orleans Parish. Of course, you only see males because women were not granted the right to vote until 1920. The second name from the bottom is my third great grandfather, Jackson Page. He's listed as 39 years old, colored, born in Louisiana, and living at 2901 6th Street. On the next page, in the second to the last row, he's asked where he lives in the area. He states that he lives in the 6th precinct of the 11th ward. Then on the next three columns, he says he has lived in the state his entire life, but in the city of New Orleans only 10 years, hint, 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 and the 11th ward for only 4 months. In the last column, he states he was born in 1859. On the right side of the page is his signature, signed by the registrar, and Jack then marked an X in between his first and his last name because he couldn't read or write. This information was the smoking gun that I was looking for to answer my research questions. Since this voter registration was recorded in 1896 and he stated that he lived in the city for only 10 years, then that implies that he left Terrebonne Parish around 1886, which is right between the birth of his third child, Lillian, and his fourth child, Nellie, as I suspected. And that also explains why I can't find birth records for Lillian and her two older sisters. This next case study expands on Fanny Shields' family, in particular her younger half-sister Delia Washington, affectionately known to the family as Aunt Dootsy. Most of the older family members that knew her are no longer living, but they all told me that she'd lived to be over 90 years old and died in New Orleans. When I acquired her death certificate, it stated that, but it also said that she was buried at St. Luke's Baptist Church Cemetery in Houma, and that she was the child of Gabriel Washington and Nellie Shields. This case study involves being creative with how you use cemetery records, because you never know where cemetery records will pop up and in what format. In 2016, I had the opportunity to go to Houma and find her headstone at the church cemetery. Here is a picture of the church grounds. You can see several headstones above ground between the church and the church van. In this next picture, there is another area of older cemetery markers under the shade of a huge tree. I spent a lot of time here looking for Aunt Dootsy's headstone, and I have tons of mosquito bites to prove it. Word to the wise, please don't show up to cemeteries like this with shorts on and white shoes. Now, I couldn't find Aunt Dootsy's headstone, but I did find her nephew right here, her sister Martha Shields, England's son. It's hard to read, but it says Reverend George M. England, born February 20th, 1877, died June 1st, 1954. Part of the reason why it's easy for me to decipher now is because I have his death certificate, which made it easy for me to identify it. But as you can see, decades of weathering have deteriorated many headstones in this cemetery, which led me to believe that Aunt Dootsy's probably deteriorated beyond recognition decades ago. After spending about an hour and a half at that cemetery, I left feeling dejected. However, my next order of business was to come here to the Terrebonne Parish Library to see what additional information I could find on my family history. I ended up engaging in conversation with the librarian, very sweet lady named Judy Sonayat, and I told her how I had just come from the cemetery and didn't find what I was looking for. She kindly introduced me to a volunteer in the library, an older gentleman whose name I cannot remember, but she told me that he was one of the many members of the Terrebonne Parish Genealogical Society that traveled all across the parish over 30 years ago to transcribe old headstones and publish them in a book that is kept on file at the library. The gentleman was kind enough to print a copy of the book's cover and the specific pages pertaining to the cemetery I just visited. This page shows the beginning of the transcription of St. Luke's headstones, As you can see here, it states that these headstones were transcribed March 21st, 1986 by Jess Bergeron. The next page shows Aunt Dootsy under the name recorded on her death certificate, Mrs. Delia Washington Brown, and it also shows her nephew, the Reverend George Monroe England. Of course, the transcriber couldn't completely make out what the headstone said, and obviously we know why. But as I said, I was fortunate enough to be able to solve that puzzle because I already acquired his death certificate. This is why it's so important for people like us to do what we do and document our families. We can't expect strangers who don't know our families and our legacies to do it for us. Only we hold the power that we were purposed with to complete our stories. At any rate, the physical evidence of Aunt Dootsy's headstone may be gone, but the paper trail proves she is there at St. Luke's Baptist Church Cemetery, and that gave me reason to smile. This is just a quick case study to again reiterate different ways that you can acquire birth and death records outside of Orleans Parish, particularly when the event occurred prior to 1918, when deaths in those parishes were not mandated to be recorded with the state. This case study involves a child born to my great-great-grandparents, Edward Benton and his wife, Mary Penny, also known as Mamie. As you can see here, there were 7 children born to them. The oldest was my great-grandmother, who you see here, Artemis Benton. However, the second child, Arthur Benton, is recorded to have been born 2 years after her and died 2 years later. This is a child no one in my family ever mentioned. More than likely, my great-grandmother and the rest of her siblings, who all lived to very old ages, probably knew the story. But I've talked to various cousins, and apparently the elders never shared it. So you're probably wondering, well, Michael, how did you come to find out about this child? Well, I joined the genealogical society I mentioned earlier that I'm not going to repeat other than to say Le Comité, and I hope you are picking up on the general theme here, which is to join a genealogy society whenever you can, because as I'm showing you through these examples, there are huge benefits to being a part of one. The screenshot here shows their website's main page, which gives you a wealth of information, but if you are a member, there's even additional information accessible to you. But before I go into that, do you see here where it says publications? You can click on this link and it will take you to a list of publications that they have on their website. You have the option of purchasing them at a non-member rate. If you look at this second one here with the red book called Civil Birth and Death Registers for the City of Baton Rouge, Louisiana from 1874 to 1918, you'll see that the non-member rate for this book is $33.50. But because I'm a member of this society, I purchased it for $13 cheaper. This book has become an invaluable tool for my research on East Baton Rouge Parish relatives. In this book, I found this recording of Arthur Benton's death on April 14, 1907, with Edward and Mamie listed as his parents. It doesn't state his date of birth, but it at least tells me he was approximately 2 years old at the time of his death. Presuming he was born around 1905, he would have been nearly 3 years younger than my great-grandmother, Artemis Benton. This book is the result of awesome volunteers and genealogists who took the time to transcribe these old records that they found in old repositories, whether it be the state archives, the courthouse, or the vital records department, and they published them in this book. If it wasn't for this publication, I may never have known about that child born to my great-great-grandparents. So again, you never know what you may find when you check what records are available on a local level. Additionally, if you become a member, you will be given access to this link here. A dialog box will appear where you can enter the username and password provided to you by the site administrator. All these bold black headings will become active links. For those of you who are greatly interested in local parish records, I want you to focus on these 2 links here, Parish Research Guides and Finding Aids. Now you're going to love this. These links provide research guides for all 64 of Louisiana's parishes and finding aids that provide great information and genealogical resources pertaining to each specific parish, such as special collections, maps, libraries, courthouses, historical societies, and contact information for these entities so that you can reach out for more information. So in a nutshell, these guides will tell you where the bodies are buried, no pun intended. I can't emphasize enough how valuable these resources are. So at this point, we will take a break. In part 2 of my presentation, we will dive deeper into case studies and special collections involving pre-Civil War records and our most precious magnolias, our enslaved ancestors.